Yo, what's up guys, and welcome to another video. In this video I'm going to tell you the 5 books that have impacted my life the most and can do the same for you. So why a video about books? Well, as you can see, I have a lot of books here. I've read a lot of books, but not all of them are of the same quality. And these 5 have impacted my life the most. I want to share them with you so you can learn something from them as well. So there's a great quote by Jim Rohn that says, "The difference between who you are right now and the person you are in 5 years is determined by the quality of the books you read." So reading is very important, and it's one of the keystone habits that has changed my life, and you're probably reading as well. So I want to share some things that I've learned from these 5 books, and it can have an impact on you as well. So let's get into the first book. The first book is actually on my Kindle. So a lot of the books that I read, I put on my Kindle. I don't put them, I don't buy them. So actually I do have this book, but it's at my girlfriend, so I don't have it right now. And the book is the biography of Steve Jobs. And you probably know Steve Jobs. He was the founder of Apple, and he was one of the greatest entrepreneurs of our time. And in the biography, it goes about how he started Apple, how he grew up, what kind of challenges he faced, and how he was as a person. And I've actually reread it for the second time in the past couple of weeks. And why did I do that? Because the biography is like 600-700 pages. Well, it's because, in my opinion, Steve Jobs is the person that has changed our lives the most. So it's not only him, it's of course also Apple, but if you look at, for example, the iPhone, the iPad, the revolutions they did in music, they changed our lives the most. And that's why I like reading biographies, because you can literally read a biography, like how someone is, someone that's very successful. And success always leaves clues. So if you read those biographies, you can kind of get certain aspects of their personality and apply that to your own life. So what did I learn specifically from the biography of Steve Jobs, and why did I read it 2 times? So about Steve Jobs, he was a very entertaining man. So for example, you have these keynotes for the iPhone, the iPad, and he changed the life, he was very charismatic. There were also parts of his personality that were not that well. For example, he could focus really well, but if he didn't like something, then he just completely forgot about it. So for example, when he was younger, he already got a child, and he didn't want to raise that child, so he just completely ignored it. So when looking at Steve Jobs, I see a very large man, but also a troubled man. And that's why you don't want to emulate everything from him, but you can learn a lot from his success and how he did it. So one of the things that's very peculiar about him is that he had what people called, and people at Apple and other companies he worked, called this the reality distortion field. And that was that he could get things done that were thought of impossible. So for example, if something new needed to be coded, and normally it would take like a month or 2 months, he would say to his team, "We will finish it by next Sunday." And in some way, because of his belief, because of his charisma, they made it happen. So then that Sunday they would all be completely hammered, but they would finish the job. And that is the first thing you can learn about Steve Jobs, is the reality distortion field. He believed in things so much, and he expected things from his workers, that eventually they got them done. So what reading biographies also does for me is that it gives me a sign of what's possible. So for example, if you look in your environment, and I'm going to make another video about your environment and how that determines your success in life, is that the people around you are probably, maybe someone is doing 10K per month with his business, maybe you have a successful trader in your network, maybe you have some people that are in a 9 to 5, and it doesn't really matter what those people are doing, but the people you have around you set sort of the standard and the bar for yourself. So for example, if you have only people that are working in a 9 to 5, then that will be the standard for you. It will be hard for you to start a business. And it's not to say that being in a 9 to 5 is bad, or only doing 2K per month is bad. It's just the standard, and there's no right or wrong. It's just what kind of goals do you have. So for example, I want to be a very big entrepreneur. I want to impact a lot of people. So what I need to do is read biographies to see what's possible. For example, reading Steve Jobs' biography, it gave me a sense of wonder of, holy shit, this guy completely changed the world with what he did, because he had a very good vision, and his performance and his like everything was so high, he expected excellence of all his workers, that eventually they made the iPhone, the iPad, and they completely changed those industries. That's why I like reading biographies, because they give you this sense like what's possible. If you only look in your environment, then you won't make those changes. So some other things that I learned from the Steve Jobs biography. The first thing is that, like, most people probably won't know this, but if you look at Apple's logo, like the first logo they had, you can probably guess it, is that Steve Jobs was very spiritually aligned. So for example, during his college years, he did a lot of LSD, he meditated a lot, and he even went to India to search for enlightenment. And the thing is that because he did those things, that impacted the work he did later. So for example, he was heavily influenced by Zen Buddhism, and Zen Buddhism stands for like minimalistic stuff, and that's what you see in Apple, and also the focus. Like Steve Jobs was known for his focus, and that all came from like his spiritual beliefs and how he grew up, a kind of experience he had. Then the second thing I learned is you have to be passionate about your product, and you have to be perfectionistic about it, because the product is the most important thing, and that's what you can really make an impact on other people, and that's, for example, what I learned from Steve Jobs. So the last thing that I learned from him is that to trust your intuition. So his biographer, Walter Isaacson, he said that Steve Jobs wasn't like particularly smart. Like he was a smart guy, but he wasn't like, for example, Einstein or something. But what he did is that he was a genius, and a genius means that he could sort of grasp things that you couldn't really grasp consciously, but that they grasped unconsciously. So he relied heavily on his intuition. And that's what I learned from him. If like your gut feeling, how you feel about things, is something you should always trust, because for some reason it's always right. So that was the first book that impacted my life the most. Let's get into the second one. And the second book is also on my Kindle, so I also don't have it right here. It's How to Win Friends and Influence People. I think it's the classic for personal development. You've probably read it, or you know about the book, but it's the book that changed my life the most. I think it was one of the first books I read, and I've reread it I think 3 or 4 times since, because it's the blueprint about how you conduct yourself with other people, how you conduct yourself in human relations, and it's just like perfect for that. It's the Bible for personal development. And what it kind of did is that it imprinted things in my subconscious, like he talks about rules for social engagement, and that has helped me ever since. So the first one is don't criticize, condemn or complain. And when I read that, I thought, like, intuitively you know you shouldn't complain and you shouldn't do things about it, but then he explains, like, for example, if you're criticizing someone, then it gives off negative energy, and that makes like persons in the room not like you. And that's why it's so important to not complain about anything, and to also don't criticize someone. Because if you're criticizing someone, it doesn't matter what you say, but the person will always be against you. So you can have the perfect rational arguments, but if you criticize something, then the other person will always be hurt, and they will always not listen to the rational arguments, but just to the subjective thing. A second thing that I learned from How to Win Friends and Influence People is that a person's name is to that person the sweetest and most important sound in any language. And like, you notice yourself, if someone says your name, it's very you like it. And for example, if someone misspells your name, you immediately think bad of the other person, and that's how important a name is. So one of the things I always try to do is to say someone's name, try to say it more often, but also when you, for example, have a text or you're doing something via the internet, always look at how their name is spelled and if you're spelling it correctly. Because if you're, for example, sending out messages, so-called messages, and you're doing that with a wrong name, then the first impression someone gets from you is that you spelled the name wrong, and the first impression is always the one that counts. So another thing that I learned, and then we'll go on to the third book, is that before you try to criticize someone else, so you shouldn't criticize at all, but if you want to give someone feedback, then the first thing you should do is talk about your own mistakes. So for example, if you have a fight, you say, okay, I did this and this wrong, I should have done this and this better, and if I look at your behavior, then I think this gave me like a weird feeling, it gave me a bad feeling. Because then you're sort of dismantling it. You're saying, okay, so I was wrong as well, and I think you can improve in this part. But if you only say, you can improve in that part, then someone else will be like, okay, what now? Like, the other person will hate you, will resent you. But if you first say, okay, this is what I did wrong, that builds up some trust with the other person. And like, there are a lot of more rules or kind of things he has in the book. These things are the most important. These are the things that have changed my life the most and that can do the same for you. So the third book we're going to talk about is Awareness by Anthony de Mello. And this book changed my life the most. And what it talks about, like Anthony de Mello is an Indian Jesuit priest, and what he talks about is how to become more aware. And it also talks about a lot of the spiritual things that other like spiritual teachers also talk about. So the main thing that I got out of it is that if you analyze yourself, so for example, if you're doing something wrong, or if you think about the person you are, so for example you say I'm introvert, I'm extrovert, then you have to notice that there's an I observing me. And that sounds very strange, but notice that there are sort of two persons. So there's a person that is analyzing, and then there's a person that is those things. So for example, you say I am an introvert. You see that you're like being more to yourself, that you don't like doing extroverted things. Then you see like the observer is the I, and the me is the characteristics you have. And once you start to see that there's an I and a me, you can start to see what the me is. So for example, I'm an entrepreneur. But is that the I or the me? Is that really something I am, or is it something that's changeable? So for example, let's say I would go into a 9-to-5, would that change the person I am? No, it won't change me. And for example, if I change something about myself, so I become more extroverted, does that really change the person I am? It does not. And if you start seeing that like the I, the person you really are, isn't something that's ever changing, like it's always the same, it always stays the same. And when you realize that, so that's the big epiphany I had from reading this book, is that no criticism can affect you, because criticism is affecting the me, so the person you think you are, that's what criticism is affecting. So if someone says to you, like, I don't like what you're doing, or I don't like the product you made, then like the reason that you are unhappy is because you're identifying with being an entrepreneur, making the product, doing stuff like that. For example, if someone says to you like, you're a great guy, then what that person is talking about is the me, not about the I. It doesn't change the I. So in the other way, it's also the same. If someone says like, you are a loser, then they're not talking about the I, the person that never changes, they're talking about the me. It's a difficult concept to grasp, but once you grasp it, like your whole life starts to change, because certain things, they just don't matter. For example, if you are afraid of public speaking, then it completely changes the game, because once you start public speaking again and you're afraid of failure, like the me part of you is afraid of failure, not the person you really are. And that's why this book has changed my life the most, and I can definitely recommend it if you're looking to get into spirituality a bit more and you find those things interesting. And then the fourth book we're going to talk about is Atomic Habits. I actually loaned this book out to a friend of mine, so I don't have it right here. But Atomic Habits by James Clear is a book about how you can change your habits and how you can change your life with that. And this book completely changed the game with personal development for me. So for example, you have a lot of personal development books, but sometimes they're a lot of talk, but you can't really practically do stuff with them. And what Atomic Habits did for me is that it's one of the most practical books there is. Like, it has so many strategies about how you can improve your habits and how you can improve your life with that. And some things that have really changed my life is, for example, at the start of the book, what James says is that if you become 1% better every day, you end up being 37 times better at the end of the year because of compound interest. So you become 1% better the first day, then 1.1% better the next day, and that compounds. So he talks about like habits are the compound interest of self-development. And that's why it's so important to focus on your habits and to change them. So another thing that I learned from reading James Clear's book is that you should focus on systems, not on goals. So let's say that you have the goal of going to 10K per month. Then what you should focus on is the system. So what's going to get you there? So for example, it's doing outreach to 10 people per day. That's what's going to get you to your goal. But if you're only focusing on, I want to get to 10K per month, like there's no plan behind that. You have to make a system of how to get there. So for example, like doing the outreach, having the sales call, stuff like that. And then another thing that is very important is identity. So for example, with the persons that I work with on a one-on-one basis, what we work on is their identity. Because how you view yourself, that's the most important thing that's going to change your habits and change your life. So that's also what James talks about. He says that in order to change your life, you need to become a certain person. So for example, if you want to lose weight and you want to go to the gym often, then you need to be a sportive person. And it's all about identity. If you don't see yourself in a certain way, then you will never change. The same is, for example, with smoking. If you say, I am not a smoker, then you will probably not smoke. But if you say, like, I just quit smoking for 2 weeks, then you're actually saying, I am still a smoker, but I just quit for 2 weeks. And then you will never change, because from the inside, you were still the smoker. Like, your identity is still a smoker. That's why your identity is one of the most important things that you want to change if you want to perform better, if you want to change your life. The last thing about habits, and that's a simple thing that you need to know, is that if you want to increase like your good habits, you want to make them easier, then you need to have less friction in them. So for example, if I wanted to start playing the piano, then you can see a piano right here, then it needs to be in the room. Because if it's in the room, then I can start playing it at any time and there's no friction to do it. If, for example, I had to get my keyboard, start playing the piano, then there's a lot of friction behind that. The same is true in the reverse and the other way. If you want to change your habits, then what you need to do, if you want to change bad habits, you need to increase the friction. So for example, if you have trouble with staying on your phone, like you're addicted to your phone, then what you need to do is throw that phone away. Put it in another room, put it in a safe, for example, because then there's a lot of friction between you thinking about going on your phone and actually going on the phone. So if you want to increase your bad habits, increase the friction. The last book that has impacted my life the most is called Flow by Michael, and I can't pronounce his last name. What the book is about the science of optimal experience. So when are we most happy and when our experience is optimal? So if you look at, like, you know the concept of flow intuitively. So for example, if you're doing some work and you get into the flow, that's what flow is. It's very simple. But what he argues in the book is that if you want to be happy, happiness is not, for example, we think that if we go on a vacation and we don't do anything, then that's when we're happiest. But that's not the case. They did a study and they asked people what they were doing and like their happiness score. And they found that the most happy people were when they were thoroughly engaged in an activity. So for example, like that's the concept of flow. So for example, when they were rock climbing, when they were doing something hard, so for example programming, they were solving a puzzle, like they completely got into the flow of the experience. That's when people are most happy. So we're not most happy when, for example, we lay on the beach. We are most happy when we're like fully engaged in something. And that's what this book taught me the most. And it's also, for example, you have the book Deep Work by Cal Newport. I also wanted to talk about that, but I decided to talk about this because this is actually what deep work means. If you get into deep work, you get into a deep focus state and you get into flow. And when you get into flow, things are much easier and they're also much nicer, so you like doing them. What needs to happen for you to be in flow? Like the task needs to be very specific. The task needs to give you like a lot of feedback immediately and you don't want to be disturbed. Another thing is that to get into flow, you need to do stuff that is challenging to you. So if something is not challenging to you, so for example, if you're a good tennis player and you just are like passing balls over the net, then that won't get you into flow, because you've done that so many times already that your brain is not really like having to work for it. And that's the same thing like with everything. If you want to be in flow, you need to do stuff that is a bit challenging for you. And that's why this book completely changed my life, because it also showed me that in order to be happy, you need to be completely into activities. So happiness is not just staring at something, or for example watching Netflix. Happiness is something you get when you're completely engaged in an activity. So that were the 5 books that changed my life the most. I'd like to know, like, what are the books that impacted you the most? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to book in a call with me for the Spectrum Performance Program, where we help you one-on-one to help you optimize your health and performance and to scale your business to the next level, then you can do so by clicking in the link below. Thanks for watching the video.